Now, when you're listening to what I read, and what you read there as you watch the words, what was the word that occurred 3 times? Well, it should have occurred 3 times. My translation has got the same word 3 times. What do you think the word could have been? Anyway, you can think about that as I talk about more. So when I was preparing for this, lots of questions came to my mind. And here was this poor dear lady. She spent all her money. She still wasn't healed. Jairus also came. He had all the money in the world that he needed. Why hadn't the doctors healed his daughter? We don't know that. But anyway, it happened when Jesus came. What these people heard about Jesus, was it all the same? He was a leader, a teacher, a healer. What is significant about the 12-year-old daughter and the lady who had an issue of blood for 12 years? Actually, I couldn't quite get my head around that one because I couldn't marry up the two. Maybe somebody will be able to tell me. Is there a connection with these 2 main characters? Jairus came humbly to Jesus. He bowed down before him. And of course my mind was thinking, oh, I wonder if he's usually humble, because he was the leader in the synagogue. His daughter was at the point of death. Maybe she was an only child, maybe his only daughter, at 12 years old. He was begging Jesus to heal his daughter. I think I would be too if my daughter was on the deathbed. I wonder, because of his position in the synagogue, he might have been the one that was used to people coming to him and bowing down. He would have been a well-known figure in the area and at the synagogue. So there were all these people, a huge crowd that had joined. I mean, people can attract people, can't they? I mean, you go to a rugby match and people want to be there because that's what their mates are going to be talking about the next day or later on that night. And so here were all these people jostling and possibly trying to get as close as they could to Jesus. Even though to Jairus it was a pressing problem, Jesus had time to stop and attend to another person's need. And this is a fascinating thing. How did that lady get there? How did she know what was going on? Because she was ostracised. She was banned from contact with anybody. I don't know if she was like that for the 12 years she suffered, but that certainly would have worn her out. The emotional strain and stress would have been beyond belief. So the rules and regulations that were set down in Leviticus, she was practicing. And of course, if she didn't, she could have been stoned for disobeying the law. She was a very brave and determined woman who made sure she was not noticed by Jesus. She knew in her mind and heart, if she could only touch the hem of his garment. That's some belief, isn't it? Just touching the hem of Jesus' robe or whatever he was wearing. And of course she was hiding, as it were, because she was fearing, I guess, that people might know who she was, and she shouldn't have been there. So what, can anybody tell me what that significant word is?
Is it touch?
No. Because it's not in all the translations. I came here without the Bible. I've been reading at home and it wasn't, not in here. Oh, it was twice, but not 3 times. Anyway.
It's twice.
Sorry?
Is it twice?
It might be in this reading.
Oh, is it immediately?
Yes, yeah. It really made me think.
I couldn't find the third one, and somebody's sitting
yes, sorry, yeah. Anyway, here we go. So immediately, and to me that was a strong word, it happened immediately. That with this woman being healed and Jairus' daughter being healed, and even spoke about the power of Jesus, immediately left him. So in an instant, it wasn't, oh, we'll wait and see what happens. It might be okay. Tomorrow we'll check in. But no, it happened right then and there. And the lady knew that she was healed completely right then. So anyway, getting back to what I was saying, for whatever reason, the doctors could not advise her or recommend for her any medicine relevant to her illness. And of course I was a bit curious, I wonder what kind of medication they would have prescribed back then. And as recorded, she actually got worse, seeking out these doctors, physicians, to heal her and give her the right medication. And of course I empathised with her and felt for her that she wasn't healed by the medication. And she used up all her money, and of course my curiosity was, where did she get the money anyway? If she was by herself and not having any contact with family and friends. Lacking money and lacking friends, if only Jesus would have heard of her. I was, as I said, curious about the money. Did she have a husband? It's not recorded. Did her family support her with money, even though she didn't have anything to do with them? This woman had a very pressing need, and as the story shows, Jesus meets us where we are and reminds us of how much he loves us, that each one of us loves us. Then the next thing is we go back to thinking about Jairus, who was a leader in the synagogue and was used to being in touch with people and their needs. He lived in Capernaum, a small village on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, in a village that was only had between 1,500 and 3,000 people living there. And interesting, Jesus moved to Capernaum at the beginning of his ministry. Jairus was a caring and loving man and father to his 12-year-old daughter, and she was at the point of death when he left home seeking Jesus. And it would seem that they set out, I've got the word immediately, but that's not. Set out for Jairus' home. A large crowd had gathered, as they did when people were aware that Jesus was there. The next part of the story is the lady with the issue of blood. She had suffered ill health for at least 12 long years. I wonder where she lived. Did she live on the streets? A little shack somewhere? People didn't want to be near her, and she didn't want to be near people too. She knew the rules and regulations. She would have been depressed, and at the end of her rope, as we might say. In my understanding of what she had been through, in today's world she would have been diagnosed lacking in iron and other essential nutrients in her bodies for living a healthy life. Here was Jesus, even though she was an outcast, ostracised by the family and friends, she had heard of Jesus and how he was healing people. This was her opportunity to come to Jesus, the great teacher and healer. She was definitely like an untouchable, and according to the Levitical law, being there in that crowd was something for which she could have been stoned, for breaking the law. And if you like to do a bit of research, you can look up Leviticus chapter 12 and chapter 15. Because anyone that touched her, they were contaminated as well and regarded as unclean. I can imagine that she was whispering to herself, I only need to touch the hem of his garment. I'm only a short distance from him. I only need to touch his hem, the hem of his robe, and I will be healed. What a belief, wasn't it, way back then? Wow. And the next thing, coming up behind Jesus, she was able to do what she wanted and believed she could do. Immediately, the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed, and the affliction ceased. Jesus, knowing immediately in himself that the power had gone out of him. The next thing he does, he turns around in the crowd and says, "Who touched my clothes?" Did the relief and joy and excitement momentarily leave the lady, for she knew more than anyone else, except Jesus, of course, whom he was referring to. When the disciples said to him, and I can imagine I would say the same perhaps, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And that could be true for us today if we had been there. How could they know? The lady came to Jesus in fear and trembling. She might have been thinking, "Oh no, what is going to happen now?" She's probably full of excitement and joy until Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" So Jesus looked around to see her. He knew who had done this thing. The woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him her story. She confessed the whole truth to Jesus. That might have taken him a while, mightn't it? He obviously had great compassion for her and said, "Daughter," this is not a word that Jesus used often, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, and you are healed of your affliction." What an amazing time for this woman. I actually renamed her the lady. I don't know what her name was. The Catholics apparently gave her a name, something like Veronica, Saint Veronica, but I thought, no, I'll just call her the lady. The flow of blood had ceased. The burden of the past 12 years had miraculously gone. Because of her belief and faith, which made her well, Jesus said, "Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." What a blessing that would have been to the lady at that time. Wow, she'd never experienced anything like that before. I wonder if she took a little bit of time to get used to not having her complaint. Was she full of joy and excitement that this has happened to her after all these years? I wonder what her family thought. Would they be joyful too, or would they be a bit sceptical? Perhaps wondering, well, actually this might come back. Yeah, and I'm sure that would have happened too. Back to Jairus and his needs. He probably wasn't aware that this lady had been healed, because there's a crowd around and the disciples were near to Jesus, and he was this one person kneeling before him. If he did, maybe it was an encouragement to him, to Jairus, for him to believe that his daughter would be well. While Jesus was still speaking, he came from people from the ruler's house, from Jairus' house, who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher anymore?" And my curiosity was, I wonder what the underlying reason for them wanting to share this news with Jesus in the crowd. Was it a situation that they came first with the news? They wanted at first to be able to tell Jesus, the great healer, what had happened to Jairus' daughter. Anyway, as soon as Jesus heard the news, off he went with Jairus. And he said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid. Don't doubt. Keep believing, do not give up." Jesus didn't want anyone else to go with him to Jairus' house except Peter, James and John, who was the brother of James. He didn't want anyone else to go with him except Jairus and the disciples. Remember, it was a huge crowd all jostling around him, wanting to be there. Curiosity gets the better of us sometimes. They came to Jairus' house, where there was another huge crowd, all making a noise, weeping, wailing loudly, and causing such commotion. This happened in those days, what I read, that this is what they did, this is what they carried out when somebody had died. This is the louder the noise, the weeping and the wailing was what they wanted, was the effect they discerned. Jesus said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, she is asleep." Oh, that would really rock you, wouldn't it? That's amazing. Only Jesus could make that statement. The child is not dead, she is asleep. Some of the crowd, of course, ridiculed and laughed at him. He calmly put the crowd outside. I'm not sure how he would manage that because they ridiculed him. Anyway, it happened. They possibly were grumbling within themselves. We want to be here. We want to see what the next thing is. Anyway, Jesus took control of the situation, and he took the parents, Jairus and his wife, the mother of the little 12-year-old, and the disciples, and went in to where the child was laying. Talitha cum, which translated is, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the girl arose and walked. And whether she was dead or on the brink of death, it didn't matter. Jesus took her by the hand and she rose up. And she immediately, she was able to walk. The family and the disciples were overcome with great amazement. Just let us think for a moment. How would we feel in that situation? If you were there with Jesus, the 3 disciples and mum and dad and the little girl lying on the bed, how would we react to that situation? Tell the person next to you how you would feel about it. What did you think when we've been talking about this, about the healing? I know that in lots of situations in our lives, we want to be healed too. We want to know that healing that Jesus brings. And as we know, and I know, not everybody is healed. But that doesn't stop us from doubting and being in fear if we put our trust and faith in God. I mean, that's an ongoing thing we have to do, is to do that, is to really call out to God in our need, the strength, the comfort, and the knowing that He hears us. And Jesus is the only one who could have performed such a life-changing miracle, not only for the little girl, but also the lady. Jesus sometimes told people, don't go and tell anybody, keep it quiet. Jesus commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and he said that something should be given her to eat. What a practical way of seeing things, wasn't it? She wouldn't have eaten for a while, wouldn't have had anything to drink, and yet he thought of doing that. Maybe Jesus commanding they say nothing to anyone because some of the people had ridiculed him, had laughed at him, or maybe it was a political situation or reason. I don't know, it doesn't tell us. We can only surmise what the reason would be. Often Jesus said that after healing someone, do not tell anyone. There's no waiting around for the healing. It happened instantly. And it would have encouraged and blessed a lot of people at that time, I'm sure. And some would have been, their faith would have been increased, and some would have gone away thinking, really? Do we check into one just to see that these people are still healed? That's doubt and fear, isn't it? And we need to remember that Jairus was a leader in the synagogue. His daughter lay sick in bed, close to dying. The crowds followed, wanting to see what Jesus was going to do next. And then, of course, the joy, Jairus' 12-year-old daughter being restored to life. And for the lady, the issue of blood for approximately 12 years, she was ostracised by friends and family. By the time she was healed, she was possibly emotionally, physically, and every other way wrung out by her experience. She believed and received, and by the simplicity of just touching Jesus' garment. Thank you, everyone. This is a lot to think about, isn't it? And throughout life, we all face grief and loss. But in this instance, two people had their lives restored. Perhaps we could just have one of the songs. So, thank you.